Star Wars has thousands of named species across its history. Out of all of them, only a handful are famous. The rest exist as background flavor, alien faces in cantinas, and Senate boxes, with no real story attached to them. But behind that wall of background flavor, the galaxy is full of species whose actual lore is genuinely horrifying. And the horror is not in what the species are. The horror is what the galaxy did to make them that way. The galaxy is not a neutral place, it runs on the choices of the people in charge of it. And the species living in the wrong corners of the wrong eras pay the cost of those choices, whether through abandonment, exclusion, or quiet betrayal by the powers that were meant to look out for them. The 4 species in this video each carry the weight of one of those, and the lore behind each of them is harder to sit with than it looks at first. The first one looks like a scavenger.
The dark truth is this: Jawas are predators who weaponized cuteness. Everything about them is calculated deception. None of it represents genuine timidity or harmlessness. They learned that appearing helpless allows them to approach valuable targets undetected. As a result, the galaxy sees creatures too weak to pose a danger. This perception functions as operational camouflage. Every aspect of their presentation serves this deception. Their small stature makes other species dismiss them as non-threatening. Settlers fail to implement serious security, and droids get captured before recognizing the threat. The deception begins with what they hide beneath the robes. They conceal their true appearance, which would horrify other species. The Complete Visual Dictionary, a canon source, describes their rodent-like faces as remarkably hideous. Despite their hidden faces, xenobiologists obtained this knowledge through post-mortem examination. Through studying corpses and skeletal remains, researchers discovered gaunt, rodent-like creatures with shrunken faces and yellow eyes. The living maintain their secret, possibly fearing that an unsettling appearance could jeopardize business with squeamish buyers. Beyond the concealment, the robes establish visual uniformity. Individual Jawas become indistinguishable, making it difficult to identify which Jawa committed a theft or determine which clan operated under a particular sandcrawler. This anonymity offers Jawas operational advantages. What lies behind this carefully constructed facade reveals the first major crime. They operate prisons for sentient beings. The Complete Visual Dictionary uses specific terminology when describing what happens inside those sandcrawlers. Droid prisons. Not storage areas or holding cells, but prisons. In the Star Wars universe, droids function as thinking, feeling beings with personalities, memories, and the capacity for fear. When Jawas capture these beings, this constitutes the capturing of sentient individuals. The capture process reveals calculated efficiency. Jawas use ion blasters to immobilize their captives without destroying them. Then, weld small tracking discs onto droid frames and attach control boxes that deliver electric shocks to enforce obedience. Once installed, the restraining bolts override a droid's programming, forcing compliance even when every circuit registers distress. From capture to sale, droids remain held in storage chambers inside the sandcrawlers, prodded into lines with hand weapons. The ones still capable of walking get herded outside when the sandcrawler reaches a settlement. The ones that cannot move get stripped for parts or melted down in onboard smelters. The scale of the operation reveals this is not an opportunistic crime, but systematic trafficking. Secrets of Tatooine confirms that sandcrawlers house as many as several hundred clan members, packed together in a maze of sleeping quarters, storage compartments, scrap piles, ventilation ducts, and walkways. The droid prisoners share this space with their captors, confined in the bowels of the vehicle that roams the desert hunting for more prey. The captives understand their situation completely. The ultimate alien anthology documents that Jawas carry ion grenades to stop droid uprisings aboard their crowded sandcrawlers. Multiple droids rebel together, and these incidents happen frequently. The captives know they are imprisoned, understand they are being sold, and resist. The vehicles themselves represent the ultimate expression of Jawa ingenuity and desperation. In Legends continuity, These massive sandcrawlers originated as nuclear fusion-powered ore-hauling vehicles abandoned by off-world mining contractors during the reign of the Old Republic. When mining companies departed Tatooine, they left behind giant mobile refineries designed to extract and process minerals across vast desert distances. The Jawas discovered these abandoned behemoths and claimed them as their own. The transformation from mining vehicle to mobile fortress demonstrates remarkable adaptation. Over centuries, Jawas modified the sandcrawlers to such an extent that their original mining purpose became virtually undetectable. The massive ore processors got converted into repair shops. Meanwhile, mineral storage bays became droid holding cells. Crew quarters designed for a few dozen miners now house up to 300 Jawas in cramped, maze-like conditions. The vehicles function as fully equipped workshops, allowing skilled reconstructions as clans make their journey across the desert wastes. These mobile fortresses serve multiple purposes beyond simple transportation. They provide protection from the harsh desert environment, shielding inhabitants from twin suns, sandstorms, and predators. The thick armor plating, originally designed to withstand the stress of heavy mining operations, now protects against attacks. The elevated position of the command deck allows scouts to survey vast distances for salvage opportunities or approaching threats. The sheer size intimidates potential attackers, making even Tusken Raiders think twice before engaging a fully operational sandcrawler. The nuclear fusion reactors that power these vehicles continue functioning after decades of Jawa maintenance, though few Jawas truly comprehend the technology they operate. They have developed temporary solutions and workarounds across several centuries of use. The sandcrawlers lumber across the desert at slow but steady speeds, their massive treads leaving deep furrows in the sand that mark their passage for days afterward. When a sandcrawler approaches a settlement, the distinctive engine sound announces its arrival long before the vehicle becomes visible on the horizon. Despite this reality, the Jawas present their operations as salvage and repair services. The galaxy accepts this framing because the alternative requires acknowledging that the cute scavengers in brown robes operate mobile prisons. The dissonance proves too uncomfortable. Therefore, the galaxy chooses to see repair services instead of trafficking operations. Another dark truth: the fraud extends beyond the trafficking itself into engineered dependency. In canon continuity, Ultimate Star Wars designates Jawas as notorious hucksters of hastily refurbished junk. When a droid proves too battered to repair, it gets cannibalized for spare parts. New owners who examine a purchased droid may discover mismatched internal components from completely different machines, as Jawa artificers make no distinction between parts designed for different purposes. More significantly, in Legends, Secrets of Tatooine reveals they take pride in their ability to sell items that only work for a short time. As long as the machine operates when the Jawas are over the horizon, the job reaches completion. By engineering their repairs to fail, they create a cycle where farmers must keep buying parts. This represents calculated exploitation designed to create dependency. The economic system demonstrates sophisticated planning. Rather than merely stealing and reselling, they use theft itself as a business model. When a sandcrawler approaches a community, citizens quickly stow all possessions safely away because theft functions as standard operating procedure. Moisture farmers often discover their property disappearing, only to find it turning up in the possession of a Jawa selling it at a tidy profit. The biological barriers function as uncrackable communication security. Jawas emit a strong, distinct odor, resulting from a mysterious solution in which they dip their clothes to retain body moisture, combined with infrequent bathing and their pheromonal communication methods. Their language consists of almost meaningless syllables that only achieve meaning when combined with smell-based emphasis. Even when a Jawa does not actively converse, their specific scent communicates their mood to others. This biological system ensures outsiders cannot understand their full conversations. When they speak Jawa trade language with moisture farmers, they employ only the simplified version. The real negotiations, the actual plans, and the true intentions remain communicated through scents other species cannot detect. Non-Jawas cannot learn the full Jawa language unless they possess enhanced smell abilities, which means they operate freely in a language the galaxy cannot crack. Although they can learn to understand other languages, most find it nearly impossible to speak any language except their own, due to biological limitations rather than stubbornness. Another dark truth: the deception reaches its darkest expression in how they commodify their own species. In Legends, Jawas barter sons and daughters as marriage merchandise. Secrets of Tatooine explains that marriages proceed with every bit as much intense trading as bartering for scrap. Families negotiate dowries and terms the same way they debate the value of a broken motivator or rusty hull plating. A daughter from one clan might undergo exchange for a son from another, with spare parts or water rations included to balance the transaction. This does not represent desperate survival measures, but rather a species that learned to turn everything, including their own offspring, into negotiable assets. A species that can commodify its own children can commodify anything. The clans function at a small scale, and without genetic diversity, they would collapse into inbreeding and extinction. Therefore, children become a valuable commodity, functioning as insurance against genetic stagnation and bargaining chips for interclan alliances. The clan system itself operates with calculated precision to ensure species survival. Jawa culture centers on family and clan identity. Legend sources confirm that their language includes 43 different terms to describe relationships, lineage, and bloodline. Clans keep track of these relations with extreme detail, recording family lines across generations. Few Jawas ever leave the clan lifestyle, and those who do typically end up in disreputable Tatooine cities such as Mos Eisley and Mos Espa, operating as independent traders or fixers. Once per year, all the clans meet at a giant gathering in the Great Basin of the Dune Sea. This massive convergence brings together thousands of Jawas from across Tatooine. The gathering serves multiple purposes beyond the marriage negotiations. Clans share stories of profitable salvage sites and dangerous territories. They trade rare parts and valuable scrap that individual clans cannot use. They exchange information about human settlement patterns and Tusken Raider movements. The gathering functions as an intelligence network where isolated clans synchronize their knowledge of the ever-changing desert landscape. The event also reinforces clan hierarchies and resolves disputes. During these gatherings, shamans from different clans meet to discuss spiritual matters and coordinate protective rituals. At the same time, master repair experts demonstrate new techniques for salvaging complex technology. Young Jawas meet potential mates from other clans, though their families handle the actual negotiations behind the scenes. The gathering represents the only time when Jawas operate as a unified species rather than as competing clans. However, even here, the trading and bargaining never stop. Resource management in the harsh desert environment demonstrates additional calculated survival strategies. For water, Jawas insert long, thin hoses down the stems of the funnel flower, a plant native to Tatooine, and siphon off the liquid stored inside. This technique allows them to extract moisture without destroying the plant, ensuring future harvests. Their primary food source consists of hubba-gourd, a fruit that humans find difficult to digest. In the Jawa language, hubba-gourd translates to the staff of life, indicating its central importance to their diet and survival. For salvage they cannot repair or resell, Jawas utilize high-powered solar smelters that melt materials down into saleable ingots. These smelters harness Tatooine's intense twin-sun radiation to achieve the extreme temperatures needed for metal processing. The ingots get traded to off-world merchants and mining operations, providing income even from completely worthless junk. Nothing gets wasted in Jawa culture. Every scrap of metal, every broken component, every piece of salvage finds either immediate use or gets stored for future need. This philosophy extends beyond mere frugality into existential necessity for a species surviving on the margins. Even their apparent victimhood serves complex purposes rather than reflecting simple vulnerability. Fortresses frequently suffer attacks by Tusken Raiders who kill Jawas to take their scavenged treasures and precious water. This creates the perception of Jawas as the injured party, which generates sympathy from human colonizers. The conflict between these two species operates on a level outsiders rarely comprehend. The relationship between Jawas and Tusken Raiders demonstrates calculated survival rather than genuine fear. While a portion of each clan travels in sandcrawlers searching for salvage, the remainder stays behind in permanent clan fortresses. As documented in Legends, these fortresses consist of large chunks of wrecked spacecraft, assembled into elaborate fortifications that dot the desert landscape. Master repair experts reside in these fortresses, performing advanced salvage procedures that exceed the capacity of sandcrawler workshops. Tusken Raiders target these fortresses specifically to pillage scavenged treasures and precious water supplies. The attacks prove brutal and methodical. Sand people will kill Jawas without hesitation during these raids, viewing the fortresses as resource caches rather than homes. This harsh reality contributes greatly to the cautious, almost paranoid nature that Jawas exhibit in all their dealings. Despite their size disadvantage, Jawas prove resourceful when cornered. They are not natural fighters, and their typical response involves retreat rather than confrontation. However, when escape proves impossible, they demonstrate surprising capability with the weapons they scavenge from the desert sands. Ion blasters, thermal detonators, and jury-rigged defensive systems transform the fortresses into formidable obstacles. The thick walls of salvaged starship hulls provide protection, while elevated positions allow defenders to rain fire on attackers. Tusken Raiders, despite their ferocity, typically shy away from massive sandcrawler fortresses, recognizing the calculated risk involved in assaulting a well-defended position. Yet the exception to their usual retreat behavior reveals the one genuine element in their culture. The Legends source Essential Guide to Alien Species describes the most prominent member of each clan as the shaman, who is always a female. Studies performed before Emperor Palpatine's ascension suggest these female shamans exhibited something similar to Force abilities, though this lacks scientific proof. She does not travel in the sandcrawler, but remains behind at the permanent fortress, protected above all else. The shamans wield power that transcends simple leadership through methods that blur the line between mysticism and authority. Unlike any Jedi, these female shamans perform elaborate spells, hexes, and blessings to protect the tribe and provide wellness for its members. The sources document these practices as integral to clan survival, rather than mere superstition. The spells invoke protection against desert dangers, while the hexes target enemies and misfortune. Meanwhile, the blessings ensure successful salvage operations and profitable trades. Whether these practices actually tap into Force abilities or function as psychological mechanisms that unify the clan remains scientifically unproven. However, their effect on clan cohesion is undeniable. Each shaman takes on a student during her tenure, training this apprentice to take her place when she passes away. The knowledge passes directly from teacher to student, ensuring continuity of practices across generations. The clan shaman, through her influence, controls most tribal decisions relating to defenses, travel, and day-to-day operations. Her spiritual authority maintains cultural continuity and prevents innovation that might threaten proven survival methods. In a species existing on the edge of extinction, where one wrong decision could destroy the entire clan, the shaman's conservative guidance proves essential. They will accept terrible losses defending the one thing they value above survival itself. Jawas will fight to defend the shaman, even facing certain defeat. The Essential Guide to Alien Species records that anthropologist Hoole documented what occurred when Tusken Raiders attacked a fortress. He witnessed Jawas defending the shaman's home against Tusken Raiders with a ferocity of beings twice their size. They did not retreat or surrender, though nearly 3/4 of the Jawas lost their lives in the process. However, because the shaman lived, and much of the clan operated away in the sandcrawler, the clan would survive to rebuild. Even this genuine devotion serves the system, as the shaman maintains cultural continuity and provides spiritual authority that keeps the clan unified. Understanding why they became predators who weaponized weakness requires examining their origins. In Legends continuity, competing theories exist about their origins, though none achieve confirmation. One theory proposes descent from an ancient species known as the Kumumga. Another suggests evolution from rodents that gradually increased in size. Earlier accounts describe an environmental disaster that transformed Tatooine from a world with underground water into the desert wasteland documented in the films. This catastrophe destroyed their underground springs and forced a choice between adaptation and extinction. The phenomenon of their glowing eyes supports the underground origins theory. In canon sources, their glowing eyes assist vision in dark crevices. According to Legends sources, Jawas use polished orange gemstones called Durant fire embedded in their facial coverings to protect their sensitive vision from bright sunlight. A species with eyes adapted for darkness appears poorly suited for a desert world with twin suns. If they truly inhabited underground cave systems around natural springs, their biology would have adapted to low-light environments. When the springs dried up and forced them to surface, they already functioned as creatures of darkness attempting to survive in blinding light. The final dark truth: they are not invaders or colonizers, but displaced natives reduced to 5% of their own world. In Legends, Secrets of Tatooine makes a significant claim. Jawas may represent the only truly native-thinking species on Tatooine. The scale of their displacement becomes clear in the population data. The Essential Atlas documents that out of approximately 200,000 inhabitants, only 10,000 are Jawas. They face a 14-to-1 numerical disadvantage against humans on their own homeworld. They took possession of abandoned mining equipment left by off-world mining concerns and converted giant mobile refineries into rolling fortresses. As humans arrived and established settlements, the native Jawas were pushed to the margins through immigration rather than military conquest. A species reduced to 5% of its own world develops survival strategies that others cannot understand. This explains their conservative culture. Innovative Jawas receive treatment as liabilities. Clan members who would make decisions affecting the Sandcrawler receive no authority. The logic proves simple. One wrong decision could destroy the entire clan. Therefore, proven methods receive exact repetition as they have for generations. Survival depends on predictability, not innovation. The galaxy made assumptions based on appearance and never questioned them. The Jawas understood this vulnerability and built an entire culture around exploiting it. What began as survival evolved into something more calculated. The displacement forced adaptation. The adaptation became a strategy. The strategy became a culture. Now, centuries later, the system functions so smoothly that questioning it would threaten the species itself. The desert does not care about morality. It only cares about what survives. The Jawas survived.
The Jawas survive by hiding what they were. The other native species on Tatooine survive by doing the opposite. Where the Jawas built a culture around looking harmless, the Tuskens built one around being seen, feared, and never understood. And the way they raise their own children explains why.
The first dark truth: pain is how Tuskens teach obedience and worth. In canon continuity, when Boba Fett undergoes combat training with a Tusken tribe in the Book of Boba Fett Season 1, Episode 2, The Tribes of Tatooine, the method is revealing. A Tusken warrior repeatedly knocks the Gadurfi stick from Fett's hands during practice sessions. The training is harsh and repetitive, with no theory taught, no progression from safe drills to full contact, and no verbal explanation of technique. Fett learns by experiencing pain and adjusting until he can disarm his opponents, not by understanding concepts or receiving instruction. This is not unique to outsiders learning Tusken ways. In fact, Luke Skywalker's encounter with Tusken Raiders in the 1997 film A New Hope follows the same pattern. A Tusken brings down his curved, double-pointed Gadurfi blade, knocking Luke unconscious. The weapon is described as the dreaded axe blade that has struck terror in the hearts of local settlers, with its curved double points designed to maximize both visible threat and physical damage. Beyond their own people, this teaching method extends to captives. When Tusken Raiders take Shmi Skywalker, they hold her for an entire month and subject her to daily hardship. In the Legends continuity, the Attack of the Clones novelization by R.A. Salvatore reveals that this was more than simple captivity, but the Tusken way of measuring their enemies. From the nods and the tone of their voices during her captivity, she realized that her resilience had impressed them. The month-long ordeal served as an evaluation, with her ability to endure determining her worth in their eyes. Even cultural education operates through the same system. According to another legend source, The Essential Guide to Alien Species, Tusken storytellers preserve tribal history through perfect memorization, with apprentices learning every tale of each lineage. However, if the apprentice makes a mistake, they are executed outright, because such an error is considered blasphemy. Once a storyteller gives an account for the first time, not one word is permitted to change from that time forward. The cultural knowledge that defines Tusken identity is taught through the threat of death. with perfection required or execution delivered. What becomes clear from combat training, weapon design, captivity, and cultural education is that in Tusken culture, pain is not a tool for achieving other goals, but the goal itself. This creates a teaching system where pain proves who has value. In canon continuity, when Cobb Vanth recounts his history with Tusken Raiders in The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1, The Marshal, he states they attacked his settlement less than a year ago and killed half a dozen people at the mining camp. His response was violent retaliation, in which he took down about twice as many Tuskens. Despite a 2-to-1 casualty ratio in the settlers' favor, the conflict continues. Neither side treats violence as a signal to stop or negotiate. Both sides treat violence as the only form of communication that matters. The fighting itself has become the relationship, rather than a breakdown of the relationship. The Tusken approach to teaching through force creates individuals who understand power only through physical proof. Warriors who have learned nothing but combat make effective raiders, but they require strict control systems to maintain tribal unity. However, this is where Tusken identity construction becomes critical. Creating warriors requires more than combat training. It requires removing any competing loyalty that might pull individuals away from the tribe. That removal starts with making sure no Tusken can be recognized as separate from any other. The second dark truth: masks and anonymity eliminate personal identity. Tusken identity is built through the erasure of individuality, and this begins with what they wear. During Boba Fett's initiation ceremony, the Tusken clothe him with Tusken robes, scarves, and bandages. Every initiate receives the same wrappings, the same masks, the same coverings, with no room for personal expression. The uniformity extends beyond simple tradition. In a legend source, Kenobi by John Jackson Miller establishes that seeing another's face was grounds for a duel to the death, with exceptions only for parents, spouses, and children under 16. A Tusken who looks upon another's face outside these permitted relationships must fight to the death. The erasure extends deeper than physical covering. No individual Tusken in any canon source is given a personal name. They are identified exclusively by role or age. The Chief, a young Tusken youth; an older Tusken, a Tusken sentry, the Tusken chieftain. Ben Kenobi lived on Tatooine for decades. He understands Tusken language, can recognize their tracks, and knows their territorial patterns. Yet, he still refers to them collectively as the Sand People, or Tusken Raiders, stating they speak in a coarse, barbaric language, but never mentioning individual names or identifiers beyond tribal affiliation. Either Tuskens do not use personal names at all, or they keep them completely internal to their culture, never revealing them even during extended contact with outsiders like Fett, who live among them. The linguistic standardization reinforces this uniformity. All Tusken communicate in the same Tusken language, with no regional variations noted. Din Djarin uses the same language and sign system with tribes across different regions of Tatooine, preventing the formation of distinct regional identities that might compete with tribal loyalty. Individual achievement is recorded only as tribal action, making personal accomplishment impossible outside collective identity. This becomes visible during the Krayt Dragon Hunt. Every action is attributed collectively. The Tuskens fire their ballistae. The Tuskens and settlers try to drag out the beast. No individual Tusken is distinguished by specific actions, with the collective performing, the collective receiving credit, and personal distinction remaining structurally impossible. The anonymity serves a function beyond simple collectivism. It prevents an individual's reputation from competing with tribal authority. The chief maintains authority through position, not achievement. Challengers cannot build reputations because reputation itself cannot exist, preventing individual power accumulation that might fracture tribal unity. This erasure of individual identity creates warriors who understand themselves only as extensions of the tribe. However, warriors require more than identity uniformity and combat training. They require spiritual justification for violence that transforms killing from sin into sacred duty. That justification comes from a religion built entirely around bloodshed. The third dark truth: Tusken spirituality depends on sacrifice and ongoing combat. Tusken religious practices integrate warfare directly into ceremonial life. When the Tusken chief gives Boba Fett a gecko for his vision quest, he explains that Fett must swallow the lizard, which will guide him from inside his head. The hallucinogenic experience is mandatory, with Fett experiencing visions of trees and oceans and creatures with red eyes, along with flashbacks to his escape from the Sarlacc that connect past trauma to present spiritual transformation. The Vision Quest is not abstract spiritual enlightenment, but has an immediate practical purpose, identifying the material for weapon creation. Fett returns with a branch to craft his Gadurfi stick. After completing the weapon, the tribe gathers as he parries with the other Tusken Raiders before a campfire, dancing around the flames in celebration of the newly created weapon. The spiritual journey's purpose was to produce a warrior through a revealing sequence. Trauma recall through forced hallucination, weapon creation, ceremonial combat, and religious dance. The spiritual transformation cannot occur without these combat elements, meaning a Tusken who experienced peaceful visions and returned empty-handed would fail initiation. Combat is not something that happens to Tuskens and requires religious explanation. Combat is what Tusken religion produces. Funeral rites follow the same pattern. After Pike Gunners kill a Bantha and several Tusken Raiders, the tribe holds a cremation that same night, with Fett himself carrying the remains of a young Tusken youth whose parents fling his remains over a fire. There is no mourning period, just death during the day and cremation that night, with the dead honored by burning them quickly and returning to the activities that caused their death. This rapid cycling through grief creates warriors who cannot afford emotional attachment. When loss is ritualized to occur within hours rather than processed over weeks, the emotional impact must be minimized, or accumulated grief would destroy the warriors psychologically. War cries operate on the same principle. During the Krayt Dragon Hunt, 3 Tuskens approach the cave and make war cries that awaken the dragon, serving both as a tactical positioning tool and a ceremonial announcement that transforms the hunt into a spiritual practice. The integration of combat into spiritual life means Tuskens cannot practice their religion without fighting. Initiation requires hallucinogenic visions leading to weapon creation. Funeral rites transition immediately back to warfare, and war cries that summon danger are ceremonial acts. A Tusken who refuses combat cannot complete initiation, honor the dead, or participate in sacred challenges, making peace equivalent to heresy. Warriors who have been trained through combat, stripped of individual identity, and religiously commanded to fight need a mechanism to absorb outsiders. A culture built on warfare must transform enemies into members or face extinction from constant losses. The solution is not to kill outsiders, but to remake them entirely. The fourth dark truth: outsiders are absorbed to grow tribal strength through forced cultural assimilation. Tusken assimilation is not limited to occasional captives. According to the legend source Kenobi, the Tusken Raiders often replenish their numbers by taking outsiders into their families, with one character noting that a human sister had joined their family years ago through this practice. The absorption of outsiders is created as standard recruitment rather than a rare occurrence, revealing a systematic approach to maintaining the tribal population through cultural assimilation. The completeness of this transformation is visible in Din Djarin. He speaks to Banthas in Tusken, communicates using their sign system, and negotiates complex agreements like the Krayt Dragon cooperation that requires understanding Tusken honor codes. His integration is so complete that he can represent Tusken interests to settlers and settler interests to Tuskens, functioning as a bridge between cultures while remaining loyal to Tusken values. After Boba Fett helps stop hover train attacks, the chief calls him a good guide, meaning someone who could lead effective raids and train warriors in new combat techniques. The approval comes from successfully adopting Tusken values, with outsiders measured by their contribution to tribal warfare capacity. The assimilation process is unidirectional. Tuskens do not adopt settler customs or technologies beyond what serves warfare. They adopt speeder bikes only after Fett trains them to use these vehicles for raiding. Outsiders become Tusken, or they remain enemies. This ability to transform outsiders into Tuskens strengthens the tribe. However, forcing enemies to become members does not explain why the fighting never stops. That requires understanding how Tusken justice operates. When one Tusken commits an act, every Tusken becomes responsible. The fifth dark truth: Tusken justice punishes groups, not individuals. Tuskens make no distinction between individual settlers. According to the Essential Guide to Alien Species, Sand People are inherently angered by the presence in their territories of off-world settlers and will often attack moisture farmers and settlers without provocation, targeting them simply for belonging to the settler category. The Attack of the Clones Visual Dictionary notes that Sand People are reputed to slay anyone foolish enough to come near their sacred wells, killing anyone who approaches, regardless of their individual identity or intentions. A settler who just arrived on Tatooine faces the same treatment as one whose family has occupied Tusken territory for generations. The dark truth is not that Tuskens alone think this way, it's that settlers mirror the exact same logic. The Attack of the Clones Visual Dictionary characterizes all Tatooine's native Tusken Raiders as violent enemies of the moisture farmers, with no distinction made between tribes or individuals. Klieg Lars demonstrates this when describing the group that took Shmi, saying those Tusken walk like men, but they're vicious, mindless monsters. Both groups operate on identical collective threat frameworks where individual identity becomes irrelevant, and group membership determines guilt. This makes resolution structurally impossible because neither side can negotiate with individuals, when individuals don't exist in their system of justice. However, collective guilt alone does not explain why territorial conflicts never end. That requires understanding how Tusken territorial claims operate. The sixth dark truth. Tusken culture relies on conflict to persist. Tusken territoriality operates without legal recognition, creating permanent conflict with anyone attempting to use Tatooine's desert regions. Moisture farmers establish farms without negotiating with Tusken tribes, and the Tusken respond with raids that enforce their claims through force rather than contracts. The hover train attacks demonstrate systematic escalation of this approach. The Pike Syndicate runs hover train routes across Tatooine's desert that cross territory Tuskens claim through traditional use. The Tuskens respond with systematic ambush, attacking frequently enough that the Pikes allocate gunners specifically to defend the trains and turn routine transport into armed convoy operations. Neither side recognizes the other's claim as legitimate, and the absence of legal frameworks means every territorial dispute becomes another fight. This creates perpetual low-intensity warfare that cannot be resolved through negotiation. When Obi-Wan rescues Luke, he mimics a krayt dragon call that scares off the Tusken attackers, who assume a krayt dragon is nearby and retreat immediately. However, the Tuskens return to the same territories afterward, with the threat creating only temporary displacement rather than permanent abandonment. Even overwhelming force produces tactical retreat, never strategic surrender. Territorial defense intensifies when resources are involved. As revealed in a legend source, The Secrets of Tatooine, Tusken tribes tightly guarded their secret desert oases, the main source of their food, defending them through force against any approach. The oases produce hubba gourds, difficult-to-digest fruit that Tuskens subsist on, with dietary dependence on a single resource at specific locations, creating structural incentive for territorial conflict. A tribe losing control of its oasis loses its food supply, making compromise impossible. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where every element depends on the others. Environmental scarcity drives territorial conflict, which reinforces cultural emphasis on combat, which produces warriors trained from childhood to respond to challenges with force, which increases casualties, which requires rapid cremation and immediate return to fighting. The cycle cannot break because removing any single element would collapse the entire system. But the cycle requires one final element to sustain itself. Suffering cannot simply be endured, it must be transformed into sacred validation. The seventh dark truth. Atrocities become sacred validation through trauma ritualization. Tusken culture turns trauma into a social structure. Personal suffering reinforces their way of life rather than questioning it. This is most visible in their relationship with banthas. According to the legend source Star Wars Complete Encyclopedia, Tusken Raiders and their bantha mounts share an almost symbiotic relationship, meaning they are deeply connected like two species that cannot survive without each other. The relationship goes beyond practical use. Marriage ceremonies involve both Tusken partners and their banthas, creating a four-way bond. When a Tusken passes away, their bantha goes into a frenzy that usually kills the creature, and the bantha is turned loose in the desert rather than given to another Tusken. This wastes a valuable resource in a resource-scarce environment. The tribe sacrifices its survival capability to honor the bond. The inverse creates social death for the Tusken. The encyclopedia notes that a member who lost his bantha was considered incomplete and an outcast among his people, with no way to restore their status. The trauma becomes a permanent identity marker. The ritualization of suffering begins even earlier. The book notes that babies often perish because of the difficult desert life, and Sand people take great pride in knowing that only the strongest survive. Infant death, which most cultures grieve as a tragedy, becomes a source of pride in Tusken society. The loss of children is reframed from a devastating loss into proof of evolutionary strength. Personal suffering becomes rigid social classifications that pass trauma across generations. The environmental trauma follows the same ritualization. During sandstorm season, clans hold themselves up in the needles according to Secrets of Tatooine, and many gruesome legends surrounded Tusken Raiders during this period. The legends describe clans fighting over limited resources during sandstorms. Rather than teaching cooperation or planning, these stories teach that only the strong survive. As a result, the next generation repeats the same behavior. The coming-of-age rituals make this trauma conversion official. In Legends continuity, the source documents that Tuskens pursued rigorous rites of passage, such as hunting the deadly krayt dragons to become adults. These are the same creatures whose calls cause Tuskens to retreat immediately, the same creatures that represent overwhelming power that Tuskens cannot safely handle. Yet, young Tuskens must face these predators as a rite of passage. The near-death experience is required for adult status. The terror of facing an enemy that can easily kill you becomes the necessary transformation into adult membership. The culture cannot produce adults without putting children in mortal danger. A Tusken who refuses the krayt dragon hunt remains a child forever in social status, regardless of physical age. The fate of those who fail is even more revealing. If they do not return from their trial, no word is mentioned of them again. Those who do not survive during the krayt dragon hunt are removed completely from tribal memory, treated as if they had never existed. The trauma of losing children to these deadly rituals is not processed through mourning, but through erasure, with failed youth disappearing from both conversation and collective history. However, the trauma system that creates fearless warriors also creates unexpected weaknesses. The ritualization of trauma creates not only cultural rigidity, but also physical vulnerability. The encyclopedia notes that the Sand people were easily intoxicated by simple sugar water, literally just water with sugar dissolved in it. This basic drink that most species consume without issue reveals how their isolation created exploitable weaknesses. The same system that makes them effective warriors makes them vulnerable to simple substances. The Tusken Raiders built a culture where every element reinforces the same goal, producing warriors who cannot imagine peace. The desert does not care about morality, it only cares about what survives. The Tuskens survived by making suffering into structure, by turning every trauma into another reason the system must continue. What began as a harsh adaptation became a systematic design. The design became culture. Now, centuries later, the system functions so completely that peace would threaten the species itself.
The Jawas and the Tuskens were shaped by what the Republic ignored. The next two species got hit by something different. Both were born with the Force already inside them. Both could have been Jedi from the moment they were old enough to train, and the Order looked at them and said no. The reasons say more about the Jedi than the species.
The first reason the Jedi never recruited from these species stems from their fundamental opposition to Jedi principles. What made Sith purebloods different was that they weren't just another Force-sensitive species. Their entire biology pulled them toward the dark side like a magnet pulls iron. For the Sith species, this wasn't a temptation, but their very nature. The Jedi way devoted itself to mastering the light side of the Force, and was built on controlling emotions, embracing peace, and seeking knowledge and serenity, while turning from passion and chaos. In direct contrast, the dark side was described as actively drawing the wicked, evil, the weak-willed, and the power-hungry into its grasp. It offered self-gain, egoism, and convenience, directly crossing the boundary that the Jedi maintained with absolute dedication. Both the Kisai and Masasi, the two primary subspecies that originated from the Sith homeworld of Korriban, were generally seen as being strong in the dark side of the Force. This wasn't learned behavior or cultural influence alone. Their blood carried the legacy of dozens of millennia of dark side evolution. The vast knowledge and ancient Sith techniques were preserved within their massive temples and structures, passed down through generations of pure Sith blood. Within Sith society, Force sensitivity marked the elite. Those blessed with the Force rose above the lower ranks of Imperial society, which was built entirely on the foundation of the dark side. But the reality behind this is far more unsettling. In Sith society, a pureblood born without any connection to the Force was considered an abomination, an existence that, by tradition, could not be allowed to continue. This cultural practice had profound implications for the Jedi. Any Sith pureblood who lived long enough to be considered for recruitment had already been shaped by a civilization that eliminated those who could not embrace the dark side. Their survival alone meant that they had been raised within a worldview defined by brutality, power, and fear, making them fundamentally incompatible with the principles of the Jedi Order. Another reason centers on how inherently dangerous the dark side itself was by nature. The lore of the dark side was characterized as powerful and dangerously easy to rush into, tempting even the strong. Individuals were warned against a tendency to seek the easy path to power, as empowering such weak souls could lead to dangerous consequences. Training Force sensitives meant constantly watching for those who lacked the will to resist the dark side's temptations. That path didn't offer a gradual descent, but a cliff edge that even strong-willed individuals could stumble over in moments of weakness or desperation. For a species that had no cultural or biological resistance to that pull, the danger multiplied exponentially. Among all Sith subspecies, the Massassi embodied everything the Jedi stood against. They were fearsome, ruthless, and efficient soldiers who lacked respect for Jedi or Republic standards. Their violent and ruthless nature wasn't something that could be trained away. It was woven into who they were as a people. The Massassi had been bred and shaped over countless generations to serve as warriors for the Sith Lords, and that purpose had become inseparable from their identity. They maintained their traditional military organization and weapons systems, rather than adopting any philosophies that contradicted their warrior heritage. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order devoted itself to mastering the light side through controlling emotions, embracing peace, and seeking knowledge and serenity. The dark side offered the exact opposite: self-gain, egoism, and convenience. These paths didn't just diverge, but opposed each other at every fundamental level. Jedi Masters understood this threat intimately. They made efforts to destroy Sith talismans specifically to prevent them from falling into the hands of uninitiated Force users or power-hungry dark side followers. The third reason centers on the deep connection to Sith power and lore that the species maintained. Sith teachings that came back to the galaxy were purposefully aimed at power-hungry individuals. The deep connection of the Sith species to the dark side was shown in the discovery that the vast knowledge and evolution of ancient Sith techniques derived from pure Sith blood over dozens of millennia were preserved within their massive structures and temples. The legacy remained alive in every stone they laid, every generation born, and every memory passed down across lifespans that most galactic powers couldn't match. Training Force sensitives required constantly watching for those who lacked the will to resist the dark side's temptations. But the Sith species had evolved over millennia without building that resistance. They had built temples to its power instead. Every stone in those temples had been laid by hands guided by dark side philosophy, and every technique preserved within them had been refined through generations of practitioners who saw the dark side not as corruption, but as the natural order of power. Fourth on the list was the Jedi's recruitment vetting process, which was meticulous by necessity. The Jedi required careful monitoring of all potential recruits, especially apprentices, to ensure they did not seek out the quick, seductive, and corrupting advantages of the dark side. As a rule, rather than an absolute law, the Jedi avoided recruiting individuals already steeped in dark side traditions. They had to devote their training to the light side, as a person who committed to the dark side lost their innate self, and became immersed in the dark, suffering penalties that fundamentally changed who they were. And the Jedi had good reasons for maintaining such strict standards. Centuries of experience had taught them that Force training could turn dangerous faster than anyone expected. Every apprentice was constantly monitored for signs of dark side temptation, while masters devoted years to training each Padawan, watching for weakness and nurturing strength. This system worked because it started with candidates who had a genuine chance of succeeding. Starting with Sith purebloods would be like building a house on quicksand, where the foundation was wrong from the beginning. This empire had been built by Darksiders who fled after suffering defeat in an ancient civil war against the Jedi, and they dedicated their new society to ruling through ambition and strength. Jedi philosophy had always warned that ambition led inevitably to the dark side of the Force, and the entire Sith civilization validated these warnings through their actions. Fifth on the list of reasons preventing their recruitment was the fundamental opposition and ideological divide between these civilizations. Sith society represented a civilization built on ruling through ambition, the very trait that Jedi teachings warned led directly to the dark side of the Force. By contrast, the Jedi were the Republic's guardians, charged with the responsibility of keeping the peace throughout known space, making conflict inevitable when confronted with an empire built entirely on opposing principles, making conflict not just possible, but inevitable. These weren't minor skirmishes or border disputes. These were existential struggles that shaped galactic history and cost millions of lives on both sides. After the Great Hyperspace War, the Sith species vanished from Republic space for over 1,000 years. They existed in separate, hostile spheres from the Jedi and the Republic. When a Sith pureblood finally appeared in Republic territory, their physical features made them immediately identifiable. Red skin and dangling cheek tendrils marked them as clearly as a uniform. Any Jedi who encountered one would recognize them instantly as members of the enemy civilization, especially since their presence in Republic space had been absent for over 1,000 years. How could the Jedi recruit from a species that saw them as ancient enemies? That ideological gap was too wide, and the historical blood between them ran too deep. And the ongoing war made any attempt at recruitment not just impossible, but potentially a betrayal of the Republic the Jedi served. As a seventh reason, the exiled history of the Sith civilization created a gap that could never be crossed. Defeated Darksiders had fled the Republic to build their own civilization, forming what became the Sith Empire. When Jedi Master Revan investigated the Sith Empire, he learned that the Sith species had vanished from Republic space after the Great Hyperspace War, indicating the two factions existed in separate, hostile spheres. This wasn't a peaceful separation or cultural divergence, but the result of war, exile, and centuries of animosity that had hardened into absolute opposition. Darksiders who founded the Sith Empire hadn't left seeking a new path. They had fled after defeat, carrying their hatred with them, and building a civilization designed to oppose everything the Jedi represented. On the other hand, the Rakata presented a completely different problem, one that went beyond ideology or culture. These ancient builders of the Infinite Empire had lost their connection to the Force itself. The eighth reason applies specifically to the Rakata and centers on their Force blindness. The Rakata possessed the Force-blind species trait, meaning they had lost their connection to the Force. Their extinction was not caused by the destruction of the Starforge. According to Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, the Rakata were already on the verge of extinction when Revan discovered them, and their tiny population could no longer sustain a viable gene pool. The Starforge's destruction shut down the temple's defenses and contributed to Lihan's isolation. But the gene pool collapse is the canon reason the species died out. This fundamental biological limitation prevented them from taking the Force sensitivity feat, which meant they could not be trained as traditional Jedi. Training someone in the Force became impossible when they could no longer sense or access it. The Rakata had once wielded the Force to build an empire that spanned the galaxy, but the loss of the Starforge severed that connection permanently. In the distant past, the Rakata had been dark side Force users, but by the era covered in our sources, they were entirely force blind. No meditation technique or training regimen could restore what was no longer there. This wasn't a matter of weak connection or untrained potential. The connection was simply gone, lost at a level so fundamental that it became a defining trait of the species itself. This force-blind trait wasn't temporary or conditional, but absolute. Where other species might have individuals with varying degrees of force sensitivity, every Rakata shared this same limitation. The Jedi could no more train a Rakata in the Force than they could teach a blind person to see through meditation alone. But even if the Rakata could somehow regain their Force connection, their culture posed serious obstacles. The ninth reason involves the violent culture and rage that characterized Rakata society. Rakata culture was noted for its violence and primitive nature. They possessed a species trait linked to rage, allowing them to enter a rage once per day as a swift action. This wasn't a matter of individual temperament or poor socialization. The capacity for rage was built into their biology as surely as their force blindness was. A species trait that allowed for entering a rage state represented the opposite of everything Jedi training aimed to achieve. 10th on the list was the difficulty in recruitment and integration that the Rakata presented. Few outsiders survived visiting the Rakata homeworld of Lehon, and the species remained mostly unfamiliar with Republic laws and systems. Although a few Rakata adventurers existed in a wider galaxy, they were rarely scouts or nobles. Sometimes they appeared as Force users, but the explicit Force-blind trait listed in their species statistics prevented any potential for proper Jedi training and made their suitability for the Jedi Order impossible. As a general rule, the Jedi Order avoided recruiting Force-sensitive individuals who were perceived as dangerous, or those who were likely to be swayed to the dark side. Even without the Force-blind limitation, the Rakata's violent culture and rage-fueled nature would have made them poor candidates for an order built on peace and emotional control. Their entire cultural history was built on conquering and controlling others through the Force. Even after losing that connection, the patterns of violence and rage remained. These weren't behaviors that could be easily unlearned or suppressed through Jedi training, but fundamental aspects of how Rakata society functioned. The Jedi didn't recruit randomly from Force-sensitive populations across the galaxy. They followed careful guidelines developed over thousands of years of experience. They specifically did not recruit individuals who practiced traditions like those of the Sith, which relied heavily on the dark side. They avoided those who seemed controlling, dangerous, or likely to fall. This philosophy made perfect sense when you understood what was at stake. Every Jedi trained represented a potential weapon for either the light or the dark. A fallen Jedi didn't just lose their way, they became active threats to everything the Order protected. The galaxy had seen too many examples of powerful Force users who turned to the dark side and caused massive destruction. The evaluation was simple. The risks dramatically outweighed the uncertain potential gains. Even if a single Sith pureblood could somehow resist their nature, their culture, and their history, they would face impossible obstacles within the Jedi Order itself. The Rakata failed an even more basic test. They lacked the fundamental requirement for Jedi training. Anger control could theoretically be taught through discipline and training. However, no amount of instruction could grant access to a power that existed beyond their biological reach. The Rakata represented a cautionary tale about what happened when a species misused the Force so thoroughly that the Force itself seemed to withdraw from them. Whether their Force blindness was a natural consequence of their actions or some kind of cosmic punishment remained unknown, but the result was the same. The books make it clear that the Jedi faced an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, how a species was born determined everything. The Sith species had evolved over dozens of millennia in an environment saturated with the dark side. Their temples and structures preserved ancient knowledge passed through pure Sith blood. This wasn't about individual choice or free will. This was about a species whose very genetic code had been shaped by dark side energy for longer than most civilizations existed. Both species demonstrated that the relationship between biology, culture, and the Force was more complex than simple individual choice could account for. The Jedi Order's refusal to recruit from these species reveals something important about how they viewed their mission. They weren't trying to save every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy. They were trying to protect the galaxy itself from the threat of dark side corruption spreading through their own ranks. The Jedi understood that they couldn't fix everything or save everyone. From the Jedi's perspective, the most compassionate choice was to recognize when individuals seemed fundamentally unsuited for their path rather than subject them to what appeared to be inevitable failure and pain. Both represented impossible challenges for an order that already struggled to maintain its numbers and its principles in a galaxy that constantly tested both. The Jedi made their choice based on practical necessity as much as philosophical conviction. They chose to work with species that offered a real chance of success rather than spending their limited resources on cases that seemed doomed from the start.
The Jedi turned away species they thought were too dangerous to let in. The next one they kept close, recruited from, and trained for thousands of years. And in the end, the galaxy did the same thing to it that the Republic did to Tatooine. It walked away when it mattered, and it left a kind so rare that only 3 members have ever been confirmed in 900 years of recorded history. Every official file on Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu carries the same word, and that word has already been proven meaningless. Every Star Wars reference that addresses them carries the same designation, unknown. Yaddle's home world is likewise listed as unknown. In all the decades since Yoda first appeared on screen in The Empire Strikes Back, no source has ever given his kind a name. Behind the scenes, the mystery has been treated as a deliberate creative decision from the very beginning. George Lucas kept the information locked down from the start, and Dave Filoni maintained that stance during the production of The Clone Wars, stating in interviews that he believed the home world would never actually be shown in any Star Wars story. Whether or not that policy holds forever, it has shaped the franchise for decades. The silence is not an oversight, it is by design. But inside the Star Wars universe, that label of unknown carries a far more troubling meaning. A missing file is not the same thing as a missing population. In Attack of the Clones, an entire planet was erased from the Jedi archives, and nobody noticed. Obi-Wan Kenobi tracked a bounty hunter's trail to a world called Kamino, searched the archives for its location, and found nothing. The Jedi librarian Jocasta Nu dismissed his concern entirely, insisting that anything absent from the archives simply did not exist. Yoda recognized the truth right away. A missing entry was not proof that something did not exist, it was evidence that someone had removed it. Count Dooku, still technically a member of the Jedi Order at the time, had deliberately deleted Kamino from the database to conceal a secret cloning operation. Tales of the Jedi later showed this moment on screen. This directly applies to the mystery surrounding Yoda's kind. If a full planet with oceans, cities, and a population of millions could vanish from the most comprehensive database in the galaxy without a single alarm, then the absence of information about one people proves nothing at all. It does not mean that they are rare. It does not mean that they are fading. It means the archives were incomplete, and the system that produced them was never as reliable as the Jedi believed. The Living Force depicts the Jedi in their final operational years as an order so weighed down by procedure that its members had stopped questioning what might be missing from their own files. Gaps were not treated as warnings, they were accepted, unexamined, part of the background noise of an organization that had confused its filing system with the truth. The Jedi's blindness went far beyond sloppy bookkeeping. Every known member of Yoda's kind was found through the Order, a book with its own priorities, its own blind spots, and its own reasons to restrict what it shared. That means our entire picture of this people is not a population count, it is one Order's recruitment ledger, and nothing more. Jedi Seekers travel the galaxy identifying Force-sensitive infants and bringing them to temples for training. That process is the cleanest explanation for why all 3 known members share extraordinary Force abilities, and why the rest of the population, if it exists, has never appeared in a single file. The Order did not catalog people, it collected the ones it could use. Still, one overlooked detail points to a wider picture. All 3 known members are Force sensitive. Grogu, at just 50 years old, can move objects with the Force, heal wounds, and perform abilities that most fully trained Jedi take decades to master. The Alien Archive documents Yaddle's mastery of Morocro, an ancient technique that could slow a living being's body functions almost to a complete stop, so rare that by the High Republic era, it was considered practically mythical. Yoda's raw power needs no further explanation. The conclusion seems obvious. Every member must be Force sensitive by nature, but that conclusion only holds if the Jedi were seeing the full population. They were not. Humans, Togrutas, Zabraks, and dozens of other people all produce both Force-sensitive and non-Force-sensitive individuals. The Jedi only recruited the Force-sensitive ones. In Tales of the Jedi, Yaddle speaks with completely normal sentence structure. Her words follow standard word order. This is strikingly different from Yoda's famous inverted speech, one of the most recognizable traits in all of Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back. No explanation has ever been offered for why 2 members of the same kind talk so differently. This matters more than it might seem at first. Language is one of the deepest markers of where a person comes from. If the way they speak is not hardwired, but shaped by culture and upbringing, then Yoda and Yaddle come from different backgrounds, different formative environments entirely. That points towards a people with cultural variety, possibly spread across multiple worlds or regions, with only a tiny fraction ever coming into contact with the Jedi Order. And if that variety exists, the way they age, reproduce, and recover from loss may be far more complex than 3 Jedi examples could ever reveal. 3 data points from a single recruiting pipeline cannot define an entire people, no matter how powerful these 3 individuals happen to be. Meanwhile, a council member was struck down by a fellow Jedi, and the Order never even noticed. Yaddle had picked up on Dooku's suspicious behavior in the aftermath of the confrontation on Naboo and followed him to a secret meeting on Coruscant. There, she found him standing alongside Darth Sidious himself. The Dark Lord ordered Dooku to enter as a final test of his commitment to the dark side. Yaddle was not a helpless figure. She was a 400-year-old Jedi Master with lifetimes of training and a seat on the Council. The 2 fought, and Dooku used the Force to collapse a heavy doorway, trapping Yaddle beneath it. She lifted the debris, but collapsed from the effort, and Dooku delivered the final blow with his lightsaber. A being who had served the light side of the Force for 400 years was cut down in a corridor, alone, with no one coming to help. The entire confrontation played out on screen in Tales of the Jedi. Jedi Knights number 5 later revealed that Yaddle had previously saved Dooku's life during the early stages of his corruption, making her fate at his hands all the more tragic. She had shown him mercy when he was at his most vulnerable, and he repaid that mercy by ending her life. The Order, blinded by the growing darkness clouding the Force, never uncovered the truth. No investigation into her disappearance ever succeeded, and the real circumstances stayed buried for decades. A council member vanished, and the most powerful Force-wielding Order in the galaxy simply moved on. Yet even Yoda himself failed to sense it. In the novel Out of the Shadows, Yaddle returns early from a sabbatical simply because she missed her time with the young students she trained. She was a scholar, a teacher, and a council member who had dedicated lifetimes to the Order that had shaped her. That devotion makes the failure to notice her disappearance even more condemning. In 3 ABY, while preparing for Luke Skywalker's arrival on Dagobah, Yoda entered the Darkside Cave and experienced a vision. The Yoda comic series by Kevin Scott depicted what he found there, an image of Dooku standing over Yaddle's body, offering only one explanation, that Yoda had allowed it to happen. That accusation carries enormous weight. Yoda was the Grand Master, the most powerful Force user alive, and one of only 2 known living members of Yaddle's kind. The Force connected him to every living thing in the galaxy, and yet, the death of someone who shared his blood, his seat on the Council, and possibly his home world passed without a tremor he could identify. For roughly 30 years, he had no idea if the Force bond between 2 members of the same kind, both sitting on the same council, in the same temple, was not enough to detect a killing, then that bond cannot be relied on to protect anyone else. Grogu's story follows the same thread of Jedi dependency. He was raised at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, trained by multiple masters over the years, and survived Order 66 only because Jedi Master Kelleran Beck fought through waves of clone troopers to rescue him. Even his life with the Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin, which appears to exist outside the Jedi framework, is rooted entirely in Jedi intervention at its origin. And the most telling absence may be the home world itself. No source has ever shown Yoda willingly disclosing where he came from to anyone during his 900 years of life. A well-known planet in the Republic's core systems would not have required that level of secrecy from someone who served the Order openly for so long. The simplest explanation is that the home world sits outside the Republic's knowledge entirely, somewhere in the Outer Rim, wild space, or unknown regions. The Chiss ascendancy thrived in those regions for thousands of years without the Republic knowing they existed, which confirms that entire civilizations can remain undetected indefinitely. If a full military power with fleets and territory could stay off the map, a single world populated by a quiet, slow-growing people could do the same without effort. 3 known faces is not the same thing as 3 total members, but that distinction, as comforting as it sounds, does not solve the problem. Even if the total population is larger than 3, their growth cycle means that any loss takes lifetimes to recover from, and that is where the real danger begins. The broken archives are only half the problem, because time itself is what makes Yoda's kind so fragile. Chapter 2: The Slowest Clock. For a people this slow to recover from loss, the purge that destroyed the Jedi may have been a final blow. Order 66 is primarily remembered as a collapse of the entire Jedi Order. In a single coordinated strike, clone troopers across the galaxy turned on their Jedi commanders and cut them down. Temples burned and masters fell. Padawans who had fought alongside their clone soldiers for years were shot in the back without warning. The Order, which had stood for over 1,000 generations, was wiped out in a matter of hours. The galaxy lost thousands of Force users in a single day, and the survivors scattered into every corner of known space. Most of the dead were human, Twi'lek, Togruta, and other common peoples. For them, the losses were devastating, but recoverable within a few generations. For Yoda's kind, the math behind that tragedy works on a completely different scale. The confirmed ages of the 3 known members paint a deeply unsettling picture. Yoda was born around 896 BBY and passed on Dagobah in 4 ABY at the age of 900, a number he confirmed himself in Return of the Jedi. Star Wars timelines place the start of his training career at approximately 100 years old, and in The Empire Strikes Back, he mentioned that he had been training Jedi for 800 years. Yaddle was born around 509 BBY, close to 400 years after Yoda. At the time of The Phantom Menace, she was approximately 477 years old, a mature adult, serving actively on the Jedi Council. When Dooku ended her life shortly after the confrontation on Naboo, she was barely past the halfway point of what Yoda's lifespan suggests their kind can naturally reach. Grogu arrived later still, born around 41 BBY, nearly 500 years after Yaddle. Vast stretches of time separate each known birth. Whether that reflects a naturally low birth rate or simply the narrow window of the Jedi's awareness, the result is the same. From everything we can observe, new life among this people arrives at a pace unlike anything else in the galaxy. No other known people in the Star Wars universe comes close. And then there's Grogu, whose age changes everything. Despite being 50 years old by the calendar, he presents as a very young child, unable to speak or care for himself, reaching for shiny objects, cooing at strangers, falling asleep at the worst possible moments. The Mandalorian made this unmistakable across 3 seasons. He cannot feed himself reliably, he cannot communicate in words, he processes the world the way a human toddler does, with fascination, confusion, and an attention span measured in moments. This is not a being who matured quickly and then stopped developing. He is genuinely young, trapped in the earliest stages of growth, by a timeline that stretches far beyond anything the galaxy is built to accommodate. And yet, even in this infantile state, his Force abilities are extraordinary. He lifted a charging mudhorn to save Jaren's life, healed a near-fatal wound with nothing but instinct, and held back a wall of fire from an incinerator trooper while barely conscious afterward. A 50-year-old toddler who can outperform trained adult Jedi in raw Force output. That combination, immense power locked inside a body that cannot yet walk steadily, is unlike anything else in the Star Wars galaxy. It also means that any threat to Grogu is not just a threat to one child, it is a threat to decades of unrealized potential that his kind cannot afford to lose. Based on these 3 data points, a rough growth timeline begins to emerge. This is an estimate drawn from extremely limited data, not just an established profile. But the direction is clear. If 50 years equals early toddlerhood, their kind develops far more slowly than any other known people in the galaxy, perhaps 10 to 15 times slower than humans. Carrying that estimate forward, adolescence might not begin until well past 100 years of age. Yoda's ability to begin training other Jedi at around 100 suggests he had reached early adulthood by that point. But even that early benchmark is staggering, 100 years of childhood. Even the most generous reading means a single new generation takes longer to arrive than most civilizations take to rise and fall. In nature, long-lived animals built this way are the most vulnerable on Earth. Elephants, great apes, and whales all produce few offspring, mature slowly, and invest heavily in each individual. Their recovery from a population crash can take 50 to 70 years, and they have the fastest growth timelines among slow-developing animals. For a people where a single generation might span 300 to 500 years, recovery from a significant loss could take thousands. The exact numbers are fictional, but the principle holds. Now consider what Order 66 meant against that math. If any members beyond Yoda and Grogu were serving as Jedi when the Purge was carried out, they would have been gunned down alongside every other Jedi in the galaxy. Yaddle was already gone by that point, but any others that the Order had recruited over the preceding lifetimes would have been in the crosshairs. Given how long members of this kind live, even a small number of additional Jedi from this people would represent an enormous portion of the active population. Losing even 2 or 3 more adults in a single day would be catastrophic for a people that takes lifetimes to produce replacements. A human population that lost a significant portion of its adults in a single event would feel the consequences within a generation or 2, roughly 40 to 60 years. For a people with generation time measured in lifetimes, those same consequences would not become visible for hundreds of years. The population might appear stable on the surface, while the loss silently compounded underneath, with fewer births in the next cycle, fewer parents to raise those young, and a narrowing of the gene pool that would only become clear long after anyone could fix it. The wound and the death can be separated by ages, and no one alive at the time of the wound would ever see the full cost. By the time the damage became obvious, every witness to the original catastrophe would be long gone. There is a darker possibility underneath all of this. If the Force connection in Yoda's kind is deeply tied to how they're built, and if that connection comes at a cost of slower development, fewer offspring, and longer timescales, then their rarity might not be a crisis at all. It might be the price of what they are. Every known member demonstrates Force abilities so far beyond the baseline that it suggests something fundamental about their makeup, not a gift that some members receive, but a defining trait built into the very fabric of what they are. If true, they were always walking the edge, long before Order 66 ever made things worse. The Force did not fail them. It's the reason they were always few. Still, Grogu's birth tells us something important. His arrival around 41 BBY means that at least one member was alive and able to reproduce during the final decades of the Republic. That is the only confirmed sign that new life was still being produced in the years before everything fell apart. But what happened to those parents is completely unknown. Whether they were Jedi, whether they lived on the home world, whether they outlasted the fall of the Republic, no source has answered that. Grogu's existence confirms reproduction was still happening roughly 50 years before The Mandalorian. It confirms nothing about whether that continued afterward. There is also a gap in Grogu's own timeline that carries weight. Jedi Master Kelleran Beck rescued him from the Jedi Temple during Order 66, fighting through clone troopers and escaping Coruscant aboard a Naboo starfighter. Grogu was approximately 22 years old at the time, still very much an infant by his kind standards. But between that escape and his appearance on Arvala 7, roughly 2 decades later, in the custody of Nikto mercenaries, almost nothing is known. Someone protected him for over 20 years. Someone fed him, sheltered him, and kept him out of sight on a remote Outer Rim world, far from any known Jedi sanctuary. No source reveals who that protector was. If it was a member of his own kind, a parent, a relative, or elder, then at least one more adult was alive during that era. That would mean the population maintained a presence beyond the Jedi Order, even after the Purge, tucked away somewhere in the galactic frontier. If it was someone else entirely, a sympathetic stranger with no connection to the Jedi, then Grogu's safety was a matter of individual compassion rather than any community support. Either answer changes what the future might look like, and neither has been given. And the most powerful regime in galactic history already figured out exactly how valuable that body was. Chapter 3: Raw Material. After the Republic fell, the new regime looked at Yoda's kind and saw only something to harvest. The transformation was total. Yoda had been the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, the most respected living Jedi in the galaxy. Yaddle had been a council member, a scholar, a teacher of generations. Their kind carried an association with wisdom, with the Force, with the highest form of authority the galaxy recognized. For hundreds of years, simply seeing a member of this kind in the Jedi Temple was a reminder of how deep the Order's roots ran. When the Jedi fell, and a new power rose to take their place, the association did not disappear. It was converted into a price tag. The mystery became an opportunity, and Grogu became the focus of a bounty. A child who, in another era, would have been raised as a Jedi was valued not for his potential wisdom or his connection to the living Force, but for what ran through his veins. The remnants of the old regime had watched the Jedi for decades. They knew what the Order's most powerful members looked like, and they understood the connection between that power and the midichlorians that made it measurable. And when they found a child of that same lineage, alone and unprotected, they knew exactly what they had found. Even before Grogu was captured, the pipeline was already built. The Kaminoan cloning facilities that produced the Republic's clone army were constructed under the secret direction of the Dark Lords. After the Republic was overthrown, Kaminoan expertise was extracted and transferred to a facility called Mount Tantus on the remote world of Wayland. The Bad Batch showed what was happening inside those walls. Scientists under Dr. Royce Hemlock continued cloning research under a project eventually known as Project Necromancer, an effort to create a Force-sensitive clone body. The series also exposed a darker layer. Mount Tantus held imprisoned young Force users with high midichlorian counts, taken from their families, and held as test subjects. These were not volunteers, they were children, ripped from their homes and locked in cells. Their bodies studied and sampled for the benefit of a regime that viewed Force sensitivity as a resource to be mined. This was not a rogue operation, it was a program with deep roots, long-term goals, and no moral boundaries. Dr. Pen Pershing is the next link in this chain. His uniform insignia in The Mandalorian connects him to the Mount Tantus program, and his specialization in cloning and Force-sensitive physiology makes him a direct heir to the Kaminoan tradition. What the earlier stages of the project lacked was material with a sufficiently high midichlorian count to make Force-sensitive cloning viable. Grogu was the missing ingredient. Working for a remnant faction led by Moff Gideon, Pershing placed a bounty on the child alongside an individual known only as the Client. When Din Djarin delivered Grogu to a safe house on Navarro, Pershing extracted a small sample. The Client wanted a more aggressive extraction, one that risked ending the child's life. Pershing pushed back, insisting that Grogu be kept alive. Official Star Wars material describes his reaction as selfless in at least one instance, but the broader context tells a more complicated story. Grogu was not a patient, he was a source that the regime's remnants intended to draw from indefinitely. Even after Djarin's rescue, the experiment simply moved to a different lab. Pershing continued his work at a separate facility on Navarro, injecting samples drawn from Grogu into volunteer test subjects. attempting to transfer the child's extraordinarily high midichlorian count into non-force sensitive hosts. But inside those tanks, the results were catastrophic. The volunteers' bodies initially showed promising responses, then rejected the samples entirely, leaving behind deformed, unrecognizable remains suspended in fluid. Pershing exhausted his supply and sent a desperate recording to Moff Gideon, requesting renewed access to what he called the donor. That single word strips Grogu of every quality that defines him: his name, his connection to the Force, his childhood. In the language of the research apparatus, he is an input in an industrial process, not a child, not a survivor, a renewable source that the regime intended to drain as long as his body could reproduce. 900 years of accumulated wisdom compressed into a label that fits on a lab report. On top of the broader program, Moff Gideon added his own personal layer of ambition. Season 3 of The Mandalorian revealed Gideon's true agenda. He had diverted resources to clone himself and give those clones force sensitivity derived from what had been taken from Grogu. He wanted to build a dynasty of force-sensitive copies, a private army grown from stolen physiology. The project was not driven by loyalty to any cause or broader ideology. It was vanity on a galactic scale, and Gideon viewed the Force itself as nothing more than a feature to be grafted onto a better version of himself. The child was no longer even a donor at this point. He was raw fuel for one man's ego. Worse still, this research outlived the regime. After Gideon's capture, Pershing entered the New Republic's amnesty program, rebranding his cloning work as medical science. He presented himself as a researcher whose expertise had been corrupted by his superiors, someone who wanted to use his skills for good. But a former operative named Elia Kane manipulated him into resuming his work, then sabotaged his rehabilitation. She effectively destroyed Pershing as a New Republic asset, while keeping his knowledge available to whatever remnant faction she still served. The New Republic did not even realize it had been infiltrated. The research adapted and found new hosts, just as the remnants always did. The failed experiments bear a noted resemblance to Supreme Leader Snoke, the artificial being who would later lead the First Order during the sequel trilogy. That visual connection suggests the samples taken from Grogu may have fed into the research chain that eventually produced Snoke and contributed to the return of Palpatine. The Rise of Skywalker later revealed clone transfer as the secret behind the Emperor's return, and if that connection holds, the strongest reading of evidence is chilling. The body of a child who should have been protected was used to bring back the very regime that destroyed his world. The greatest tragedy would not just be that one of the youngest members of his kind was exploited, it would be that his exploitation helped resurrect the architect of the Jedi's destruction. And the concept that made all of this possible goes back to the prequels. Midichlorians, the microscopic life forms that serve as the bridge between a being and the Force, were first introduced in The Phantom Menace. Within the story's own logic, midichlorians turned the Force from something purely mystical into something measurable, something that could be counted, compared, and most importantly, extracted. Before midichlorians, a being's connection to the Force was spiritual. After midichlorians, it was physical. That single shift changed everything. Pershing's experiments proved that midichlorian-rich samples can be harvested and injected into other beings. The experiments failed, but the principle was established. Force sensitivity is a transferable physical resource. For a people where every known member carries extraordinarily high midichlorian counts, this transforms every living individual into a prize of enormous value. Not because of who they are, but because of what can be taken from them. The Force, once treated as sacred, has been reduced to a substance that can be drawn from a vein. The shift from spiritual to physical did not just change how the galaxy understood the Force, it changed what people with power were willing to do to get it. Even if hundreds or thousands of members exist on a home world no one has found, the knowledge that their bodies can be harvested makes every one of them a prize the moment they are discovered. Coming out of obscurity means drawing attention. Participating in galactic life means being turned into a resource. Helping rebuild any order or government means exposing their members to a research apparatus that already knows what their physiology is worth. Obscurity offers safety but guarantees irrelevance. Visibility offers purpose but guarantees becoming raw material. And for a people that takes lifetimes to recover from a single loss, one miscalculation could set the population back by 1,000 years. The galaxy stopped seeing sages a long time ago, and nothing Grogu has done changes that. Chapter 4: The Inescapable Trap. Every path forward leads Grogu deeper into the same danger, and the math does not bend. The labs may be shut down, but the knowledge endured. The science behind the midichlorian transfer experiments did not disappear when Moff Gideon fell. Every scientist who worked on Project Necromancer, every technician who processed the samples, every officer who read the reports, carries a piece of that knowledge. That information is scattered across the galaxy now, embedded in minds and in files that no single authority controls. And the galaxy that awaits Grogu is not a peaceful one. The New Republic has already shown it cannot protect its own amnesty subjects from sabotage. It cannot even detect a single operative working inside its own rehabilitation program. The government that was supposed to replace the Empire cannot secure its own hallways. That is the galaxy Grogu is navigating right now, one that cannot protect him, even when it is trying to. Din Djarin rescued the child from the very forces that wanted to use him. He had already delivered Grogu for payment, collected the bounty, walked away with his reward, and could have disappeared into the Outer Rim without looking back. No one would have blamed him. The guild expected compliance, not conscience. And then, something shifted. He went back, fought his way through armed guards, and took the child. He gave up his standing with the Bounty Hunters Guild, put his own tribe in danger, and built an entirely new life around a being he barely understood. What started as a contract became something that neither of them had experienced before. For Djarin, a solitary warrior raised in a culture of war, the child gave him something to protect beyond a creed. For Grogu, a survivor of the worst night in Jedi history, the bounty hunter offered something no order or temple ever had. Not just safety, but a bond that was chosen rather than assigned. The Jedi had trained Grogu because of what he was. Djarin protected him because of who he was becoming. That distinction between being valued for your nature and being valued for yourself is the most important difference in the child's entire story. And as Grogu grew, he began choosing back. By Season 2, he reached out through the Force on the ancient Seeing Stone of Tython and connected with Ahsoka Tano. She sensed his history, learning his name and feeling the fear and loss that still clung to him from the fall of the temple. She refused to train him, concerned that his attachment to Djarin could lead him down the same dark path that had destroyed Anakin Skywalker. The same attachment the Jedi had always warned against was now the defining force in the life of one of the last known members of Yoda's kind. Grogu ultimately went with Luke Skywalker for Jedi training, and Djarin removed his helmet for the first time in front of another person so the child could see his face before they parted. Then came the turning point that defined his future. In the Book of Boba Fett, Luke presented Grogu with a choice that cut to the heart of his identity: continue Jedi training or return to Din Djarin. Grogu chose Djarin. He chose the Father over the Order, the relationship over the tradition. For a child who had lost everything in the Temple fire, the choice was not between power and love, it was between two versions of belonging, and he picked the one that had never let him down. This was not a rejection of the Force. He will carry his Force abilities for the rest of his life, regardless of where he goes. It was a rejection of the idea that the Jedi, the same order whose blind spots had already failed his kind, was the only framework that could define him. For a people whose entire known history is wrapped up in the Jedi, choosing to walk away from that order is a break from every recorded precedent. It also means that the one organization in the galaxy that might have had the resources and the knowledge to help protect his kind no longer has a claim on him. He is free, but he's also alone in a way that no previous member of his kind has been. In Season 3, that choice took a name. Grogu participated in Mandalorian rituals, accompanied Djarin on missions, and was formally recognized as his foundling and apprentice. He wore Mandalorian armor forged from Beskar, the sacred metal of the culture that had taken him in. In the episode The Foundling, he relived his rescue from the burning Jedi Temple during Order 66, a flashback recently expanded by the Star Wars Jar Jar comic series, which placed Jar Jar Binks and Naboo soldiers in the escape alongside Jedi Master Kelleran Beck. One belonging ended in fire, another was just beginning. By the season finale, Grogu had taken the name Din Grogu, following Mandalorian naming custom. Names carry enormous weight in Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. Ben Solo became Kylo Ren. Each transformation marked a fundamental shift in identity. Grogu adapting the name Din Grogu marks his formal acceptance of Mandalorian identity and his bond with Din Djarin as something permanent. He took his father's name not because his blood demanded it, but because his belonging did. In a galaxy that reduced him to the donor, he now carries a name that belongs to no research file and no laboratory log. But chosen belonging does not solve the equation underneath. Grogu still carries the same midichlorian count that made him a prize. He still belongs to a people that takes lifetimes to produce a single generation. A Mandalorian name and Beskar armor offer protection, but they do not change what he is. If Grogu lives as long as Yoda did, he has roughly 850 years ahead of him. That sounds like a long time, but he will not reach full maturity for decades, possibly longer. He will not be capable of reproduction for even longer than that, and his offspring would take just as long to mature themselves. One generation of recovery takes longer than the entire lifespan of the Galactic Republic. The Republic rose, governed the galaxy, fought the Clone Wars, and fell to the Empire in less time than it would take for Grogu's hypothetical grandchildren to reach adulthood. No amount of armor or belonging changes what those numbers mean for the future of his kind, and the very qualities that defined his kind are the ones that make recovery nearly impossible. Their extraordinary force sensitivity makes every living member a prize. Their slow development means every loss takes lifetimes to recover from. Their long lifespans create the illusion of stability, while the population silently narrows underneath. A single elder can live long enough to mask the fact that no new generation has arrived to take their place. The galaxy does not wait for slow peoples. It moves at the speed of the fastest ones, and Yoda's kind has never been fast at anything except using the Force. Yoda himself proved that his kind could outlast anything the galaxy threw at them, but even his endurance came with limits. In the Clone Wars Season 6, Yoda undertook a journey guided by the Force priestesses to learn the secret of preserving consciousness beyond life, the ability to become a Force ghost. He succeeded, and the journey itself showed how far beyond the Jedi mainstream his understanding of the Force had grown. When he appeared to Luke in The Last Jedi, his consciousness persisted beyond the reach of anyone who would have used him as a resource. He could speak, teach, and even call lightning down on a tree full of ancient Jedi texts. But Force ghosts do not reproduce, they do not raise young, they do not contribute to any population. Yoda's continuation beyond the physical is the most complete form of individual preservation his kind has ever achieved, and it does nothing for their future. The upcoming film, The Mandalorian and Grogu, reinforces this direction. Neither the film's creators nor its marketing have framed the story as an original reveal or a homeworld discovery. Everything released so far points towards a story about a father and a son navigating a galaxy that is still not safe for either of them. The trajectory is clearly towards a character whose significance lies in who he's becoming, not in what he might one day reproduce. That is a meaningful story for one character. It is not a future for an entire people. Viewed through this lens, Grogu is irreplaceable in the most literal sense. The only previous attempt to bridge the Jedi and Mandalorian traditions was Tari Vizsla, the sole confirmed Mandalorian Jedi. He created the Darksaber, the weapon that would define Mandalorian leadership for lifetimes after his death. But his legacy collapsed into further hostility between the two cultures the moment he was gone. One individual, no matter how extraordinary, could not permanently bridge two civilizations by himself. Grogu carries both traditions forward, but legacy is not the same as lasting. If he is lost at 50, his kind does not just lose one member, it loses an individual who would not have reached full maturity for decades, or even lifetimes more. It loses the only living being who bridges two cultures that have been at war for most of recorded history. That is not simply one fewer name on a list, it is a gap in their future that nothing can fill. And every day he walks in the open, He is one step closer to the kind of loss his people cannot afford, a 50-year-old child carrying Jedi knowledge, Mandalorian belonging, and the memory of a people the galaxy tried to forget. He's already survived the worst the galaxy could throw at him. He chose his own father. He earned his own name. He wears Beskar not because he was born to it, but because someone decided he was worth protecting. And he still has lifetimes ahead of him. But lifetimes are not enough when each generation takes longer to arrive than most civilizations take to rise and fall. The galaxy has already shown what it does when it finds a member of his kind. It measured him. It harvested him. It reduced 900 years of accumulated wisdom to a sample in a vial. The labs are gone, but the knowledge is not. The regime fell, but the remnants adapted and found new hosts. The playbook is already written, sitting in the memory of every researcher and officer who ever touched Project Necromancer. And the next time someone finds a member of this kind, they will not need to build the apparatus from scratch. The blueprint already exists. 3 known faces across 900 years of history, and the youngest of them is just getting started, walking into a galaxy that has already proven it will not let his kind exist in peace. If they are to endure, it'll need something far greater than one child's courage, something far greater than one Mandalorian father's protection, and so far, nothing in the galaxy has offered that. The Jawas, the Tuskens, and the species the Jedi excluded all evolved inside the galaxy most fans recognize. The species that evolved outside it are something else entirely, and the reason most ships never come back from the unknown regions is one of them. Watch the nightmares of traveling outside the galaxy next.